October 12th, 2003. A pilot and his wife take off for what should have been a romantic weekend at a remote cabin on Honeymoon Lake. They never come back. No flight plan, no distress call, just a silent seaplane vanishing over still water. 16 years later, the wreck is found. But what's inside isn't what anyone expected. Before we begin, remember, every case starts with someone thinking it can't happen to them. Subscribe for more deep-dive true crime stories. The fog rolled low and heavy across Honeymoon Lake that morning, blurring the tree line into a watercolor of muted grays and greenish blues. The water was motionless, as if holding its breath. It was the kind of stillness that made sound travel strangely. A single splash echoed like a gunshot. A bird call seemed amplified, haunting. At 7:42 a.m., an old fisherman named Frank Dalton eased his aluminum rowboat into the water, same as he had every morning since his retirement. He wasn't expecting to find anything unusual. He never did. Honeymoon Lake was quiet, almost aggressively so. He liked that. The world beyond these woods had become too loud, too complicated. He rowed toward the north inlet, where the fog was thickest. His oars stirred small whirlpools into the surface. Then he noticed something. A faint metallic glimmer beneath the mist, like light bending wrong. He squinted. At first, he thought it was just a rock shelf catching the morning light. But the reflection pulsed again, sharper this time, unmistakably glass. He stopped rowing. His breath condensed in front of him. Beneath the rippling surface, maybe 6 feet down, something pale and curved caught his eye. A wing, he realized slowly. An aircraft wing. Frank's first thought wasn't horror, but confusion. Honeymoon Lake was deep, yes, but remote. There hadn't been a recorded crash here in decades. He dipped an oar to test the depth and struck metal. A hollow, resonant clang vibrated up the handle. His pulse quickened. By the time the local sheriff arrived 2 hours later, the fog had lifted enough to reveal the outline of a small Cessna 185 seaplane. Its silver body tilted slightly toward the lake bed. One wing snapped clean at the joint. The tail number was still visible through the algae. N3592C. Sheriff Elaine Mercer crouched by the shore, notebook in hand. "You said you found it just under the surface?" Frank nodded, hat clutched in both hands. "Didn't expect to see no airplane out here. Nobody flies low anymore, not since—" He trailed off. Everyone in town knew what he was about to say. Not since they disappeared. Elaine's eyes traced the faint letters of the tail number again, her throat tightening. She'd been a rookie deputy back then, October 2003, when the missing persons case of Daniel and Claire Warren had swept through the county. A young pilot and his bride, newly married, honeymooning in their own plane, gone without a trace. The official report had called it a probable crash due to weather. But no debris, no bodies, no black box had ever been recovered. The families eventually moved away. The lake returned to silence. Now, after 16 years, the silence had broken. Divers arrived by noon. They entered the water with careful efficiency, disappearing into the green depths. The waiting crowd, local press, a few curious onlookers, and a handful of older residents, stayed eerily quiet. It felt like watching the past resurface. When the first diver emerged 40 minutes later, he looked pale beneath his mask. "What did you find?" Elaine called out. The man shook his head slowly. "2 skeletons," he said. "Strapped in." Pilot and passenger A murmur rippled through the group. Someone whispered, "That poor girl." But before Elaine could respond, the diver added something that made everyone freeze. "They're both wearing wedding rings," he said carefully. But the pilot's seat was empty. Elaine frowned. "Empty." He nodded. Whoever was flying that plane, he wasn't in it when it went down. For a long moment, no one spoke. The water lapped quietly at the rocks, gentle as a sigh. Later, under a canopy of floodlights, The wreck was lifted from the lake. Mud, weeds, and ghostly trails of algae streamed off the fuselage. The investigators worked in silence, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. Inside the cabin, they found Claire Warren's body, or what remained of it, still belted into the passenger seat, her wedding band faintly gleaming. In the pilot's seat, only straps. No remains. What puzzled everyone more was what they found in the back, a canvas duffel bag, zipped shut, preserved by the cold. When the evidence tech opened it, he froze. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of Claire. At home, at work, at the grocery store, all taken from a distance, all before she'd even met Daniel. The sheriff's breath hitched. "Get the coroner," she said, voice tight. "And call the Warrens next of kin." Across the water, the fog knit itself closed, as if the lake were stitching the wound shut. The smell of old paper and cold coffee hung in the small records room of the Mason County Sheriff's Office. Afternoon light filtered through dusty blinds, striping the walls with thin bars of gold. Sheriff Elaine Mercer stood beside the metal filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years, the one marked Warren, 2003. The drawer slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside were two slim folders, their edges softened with age. Daniel Warren, Claire Warren. She remembered the day she'd filed them. She'd been 29, still green, still believing every mystery had an answer if you just looked hard enough. Now, 16 years later, the files looked like ghosts. Elaine flipped open the first one. Black and white photographs, statements, flight logs, newspaper clippings, newlyweds vanish over Honeymoon Lake. She could still hear the way reporters had said it back then. Romantic tragedy, they'd called it. It had been good television. She turned to the witness statements. A store clerk remembered them buying extra fuel cans. A fisherman thought he'd heard an engine sputter around midnight. None of it had led anywhere. She rubbed her temple, fatigue pressing behind her eyes. Her deputy, Carl Timmons, entered carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. "They're bringing the plane in tomorrow," he said, handing her one. "State's sending a forensic team from Austin. You gonna reopen the case?" Elaine nodded slowly. "I don't have a choice. You saw the photos." Carl grimaced. "Yeah, creepy as hell. Dozens of shots, all of her before she even met the guy. You think Daniel took him?" "I don't know," Elaine said. "But if he did, we're not looking at a crash. We're looking at a setup." She set the folder down, staring at the grainy wedding photograph clipped to the inside. Claire was radiant. Auburn hair, bright eyes, laughter caught mid-frame. Daniel stood beside her, tall and calm, his pilot's uniform crisp even on his wedding day. He looked proud, confident, and yet, in every photo, something about his expression bothered her, a certain detachment, as if he were always half somewhere else. A knock on the doorframe pulled her back. It was Dr. Emily Rhodes, the county coroner. "I just came from the lab," she said. "We confirmed the remains from the passenger seat as Claire Warren. Dental match is solid. Time of death aligns with the night of the disappearance," Elaine exhaled. "And the pilot?" Emily shook her head. "No body, no bone fragments, just the harness." Elaine felt a chill. Could he have survived? Swum to shore. Possible, Emily admitted, but not likely. The water temperature that night was 38 degrees. Hypothermia would have set in fast, unless it wasn't him in the seat, Elaine finished. Emily hesitated. "There's something else." "You should see this." She handed over a small evidence envelope. Inside was a photograph, water-damaged but legible. A black and white image of a young woman at a lakeside dock, sitting on the edge with her feet in the water. The edges were curled, but the writing on the back was unmistakable. "Claire, Honeymoon Lake, 1996. Elaine frowned. She wasn't even married then. How did this end up in a plane that crashed in 2003? Emily's face was pale. That's what I'm trying to figure out. There's something off about this place, Elaine. It's like it's been waiting for someone to look again. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the fluorescent light filling the room. Then Elaine asked, "Who's still local from the original family?" "Claire's sister," Carl said. "Lives out near Cedar Hollow. Name's Nora Bennett now. Get her on the phone," Elaine said. "Tell her I'd like to see her in person." By the time Elaine reached the Bennett farmhouse, the sun had already begun to sink behind the hills. The property was old but well kept, surrounded by brittle oaks. A weathered float-plane propeller hung above the porch like a relic. Nora answered the door before Elaine could knock. She was in her early 40s, hair streaked with gray, face drawn but not fragile. The resemblance to Claire was unmistakable. Same eyes, same quiet strength. "I heard," Nora said softly. "About the plane." Elaine nodded. "I thought you should know before the press does. We recovered remains. We believe it's Claire." Nora's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I already knew," she said. "I could feel it when they said they'd found something. I felt her gone for a long time." Elaine hesitated, then pulled out the photograph. "Do you recognize this?" Nora took it carefully. Her brow furrowed. "That's Claire, at the lake near our uncle's cabin. 1996. We went there every summer. But this isn't one of ours. I've never seen this copy. Do you know who took it?" "No, she was alone that morning. Said she wanted to watch the sunrise." Elaine nodded slowly, her pulse rising. "Nora, I need to ask, was there anyone in Claire's past who might have been watching her? Someone obsessed?" Nora was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "There was one man, a local mechanic, used to help Daniel with his plane. He had a crush on her before she got married. She brushed him off, but he didn't take it well." "What was his name?" Elaine asked. Nora looked up, her eyes dark. "Reed Talbot. He still lives by the lake." Elaine felt a cold certainty settle in her gut. 16 years ago, they had searched that lake for a crash. Maybe they should have been searching for a killer. That night, back in her office, Elaine pinned the new photograph beside the old newspaper clippings. The faces of Daniel and Claire looked down at her from the board, frozen in the sepia of happier days. In the silence, the old building creaked, settling into the weight of years. Outside, the wind stirred the pine branches. Somewhere out there, Honeymoon Lake glimmered under the moonlight, a mirror for the past. Elaine stared at the evidence wall, the unease growing in her chest. If Daniel Warren hadn't died in that plane, then someone had been waiting 16 years for him to come back. The road to Honeymoon Lake wound through dense pine forest, each bend revealing fleeting glimpses of water flashing silver beneath the morning sun. Sheriff Elaine Mercer drove with her window cracked open, the cold autumn air carrying the scent of pine sap and lake moss. The radio crackled with static. No cell signal here, same as it had been 16 years ago. She slowed as the gravel road narrowed, tires crunching over fallen leaves. The Talbot property appeared just past a rusted gate marked by a faded sign. Reed's Repairs, Small Engines and Marine. A weathered cabin squatted beside a sagging boathouse, its roof patched with mismatched shingles. Beyond, the lake spread wide and silent, its surface reflecting the low clouds like polished metal. Elaine parked and stepped out. Somewhere nearby, a chainsaw sputtered to life, coughed twice, and died. "Sheriff?" The voice came from behind the cabin. A man emerged, wiping grease from his hands on a rag. Reed Talbot was in his late 50s now, broad-shouldered but hollow-eyed, his beard shot with gray. His gaze lingered on Elaine's badge before flicking toward her SUV, where the county seal gleamed in the light. "I heard about the plane," he said flatly. "Figured someone would come by." Elaine studied him carefully. "You knew Daniel and Claire Warren." "Everyone around here did." Reed's tone was neutral, practiced. tragic thing. You worked on Daniel's aircraft, correct? He nodded once. Did routine maintenance. Cessna 185. Good machine. Or it was Elaine pulled out her notebook. Do you recall the last time you saw them? Reed squinted toward the lake. Week before they went missing. Daniel brought the plane in for a fuel leak. Fixed it myself. He said he and Claire were heading up for their honeymoon. Anything unusual about that visit? A faint smile tugged at Reed's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Unusual? Around here, everything's quiet, Sheriff. Always has been. Elaine let the silence stretch before asking, Did you know Claire before she married Daniel? That earned a longer pause. Reed looked down, folding the rag between his hands. Yeah, he said finally. Knew her from town. She was friendly. People talk. You know how it is. People said you liked her, Elaine said carefully. His eyes flicked up sharply. I liked everyone. Doesn't mean anything I didn't say it did. He studied her a moment, as if weighing her honesty, then shrugged. She was a nice girl. Out of my league. You know what small towns are like. You look at someone too long, and suddenly you're the talk of the diner. Elaine nodded. You were seen near the lake the night they disappeared. That's so. Fisherman saw your truck parked by the north inlet. Said you were out there till nearly midnight. Reed's jaw tightened. I fix boats. I test engines. That's what I was doing. You gonna arrest me for working? Elaine didn't answer. She glanced past him toward the boathouse. The wooden structure sagged at one corner, its door chained but unlocked. A faint chemical smell, oil, rust, and something older, drifted out through the gaps in the boards. Mind if I take a look inside? Got a warrant? Not yet. Then I mind. Elaine met his gaze. For a moment, neither moved. Reed's expression was unreadable, calm, maybe even resigned. Then he broke eye contact, turning away. I heard they found her, he said quietly. Claire? Yes. He nodded slowly, the rag twisting in his hands. 16 years under that water. Guess the lake never forgets. His voice carried a strange weight, like something half-confessed. Elaine closed her notebook. We'll be back, Mr. Talbot. He gave a curt nod. You usually are. The drive back to town felt longer. The clouds had thickened, casting the lake into shadow. Elaine's phone buzzed weakly as she regained service. A new message from Deputy Carl Timmons. Call me ASAP. Found something in Daniel's old flight locker. She pulled into the sheriff's lot 15 minutes later. Carl met her at the back entrance, holding a sealed evidence box. You're gonna want to see this, he said, leading her inside. They opened it on her desk. Inside were flight charts, notebooks, and a black leather-bound logbook embossed with Daniel Warren's initials. The pages were warped with age, but the ink remained legible. Elaine flipped through dates, flight hours, maintenance notes, brief comments about weather. Then, halfway through, the handwriting changed. The letters slanted differently, heavier, as if written by someone unfamiliar with the pen. She paused. These entries don't match his signature. Carl nodded. Exactly. For the last 2 weeks before they vanished, someone else was logging his flights. Someone trying to write like him. Elaine scanned the last entry, dated October 11th, 2003, the night before the disappearance. Honeymoon Lake. One final trip. She doesn't know yet. The water hides everything. Her stomach tightened. She doesn't know yet, she murmured. Know what? Carl looked grim. We also found this stuffed inside the back cover. He handed her a small Polaroid, faded but clear. It showed a young woman, eyes wide, tied to a dock post. The photo was decades old, maybe 1990s. Elaine stared at it. The background, the dock, the tree line, the water, was unmistakable. Honeymoon Lake. Where did this come from? She asked. Carl shook his head. The locker was in storage at the regional hangar. Belonged to Daniel's flight school. Nobody touched it since 2003. Maintenance just turned the key for us today. Elaine set the photo down, unease rising like static in her chest. The handwriting, the photograph, the missing pilot. The lines between victim and predator were blurring fast. "Run fingerprints on everything," she said, "and have Reed Talbot's file pulled from the archives." "I want to know where he was that week." Carl hesitated. "You think Reed was flying that night?" Elaine looked at the Polaroid again. The rope, the terrified eyes. The dock she knew too well. "I think," she said slowly, "that someone wanted Claire Warren to end up in that plane. And whoever it was, they were in the pilot's seat." That night, rain swept in over the lake, drumming against Reed Talbot's roof. Inside, the mechanic sat alone at his kitchen table, an old photograph spread before him. Claire at the dock, sunlight in her hair. He traced the outline with an oil-stained finger, his expression unreadable. Outside, thunder rolled across the water. Reed's reflection flickered in the window pane, fractured, ghostly, like something submerged and waiting to rise. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It ran in silver threads down the windows of the sheriff's office, turning the parking lot into a sheet of rippling gray. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed above stacks of evidence boxes, the air heavy with damp paper and old coffee. Sheriff Elaine Mercer sat alone at her desk, the Polaroid from Daniel Warren's locker propped against her mug. She'd stared at it so long that the image had begun to feel alive, as if the woman's frightened eyes might blink. The phone rang. "Mercer." It was Deputy Carl Timmons. His voice carried static. He was calling from the old airfield. "You better come down here," he said. "Maintenance found something in the radio archives." "It's weird." Elaine was already on her feet. The regional airstrip sat 5 miles outside of town, a lonely stretch of cracked tarmac lined with sagging hangars. Inside the operations building, the smell of dust and aviation fuel hit her immediately. The scent of the past. Carl met her in the control room, where a reel-to-reel tape recorder sat on the console, a handwritten label on the case. October 12, 2003, Channel 7, Tower Log Backup. "Technician says it shouldn't exist," Carl said. "They switched to digital logs that summer. This was buried under a pile of junk in the back room." Elaine leaned closer. "Whose voice is on it?" "Listen for yourself." He pressed play. The tape hissed. Then a male voice crackled through, low, tense. "Tower, this is November 3592. Charlie requesting landing vector for Honeymoon Lake." Elaine's pulse quickened. Daniel's call sign. A pause, then static. "Repeat, Tower. This is fuel low. We're—" The rest dissolved in a burst of noise. Then faintly, another voice, female, trembling. "Danny, please, you said—" The line cut. Carl glanced at her. "That's Claire." Elaine leaned forward. "Play the rest." The hiss continued for several seconds. Then, clear and chilling, a new voice spoke. Calmer, colder, not Daniel's. "She doesn't understand what you did, Danny." Silence. Then a click. The recording ended. Elaine exhaled slowly. "Run that through audio forensics. I want a clean profile of that last voice." Carl nodded. "Already sent it to Austin. But there's more. The tape counter shows 2 hours of blank space before the tower log begins again. Somebody erased part of it. Maybe to hide the transmission. Or to make sure we only heard what they wanted us to." Elaine stared at the spinning reels until they slowed to a stop. The mechanical rhythm reminded her of a heartbeat, faint and persistent. By late afternoon, she was back at her desk when her office door creaked open. Nora Bennett stepped inside, coat damp from rain. Her eyes were rimmed red but determined. "I heard about the recording," she said quietly. "Carl called. I needed to hear it for myself." Elaine hesitated, then motioned her to sit. She played the tape again, lowering the volume when Claire's voice came through. Nora closed her eyes. "That's her," she whispered. "She sounds scared." "She was," Elaine said. "Do you recognize the third voice?" Nora frowned, listening carefully. "No, but it reminds me of someone. The way he stretches his vowels, like he's used to giving orders." Elaine made a note. Daniel was in the Air National Guard before he started the charter business. Maybe someone from his unit. Or maybe, Nora said, it's the man who took the photograph. Elaine looked at her. "You think Reed Talbot?" "I don't know," Nora admitted. "But if Claire was being watched, maybe Daniel found out. Maybe that's what she didn't understand, what he'd done to protect her." Elaine considered that. Protection could look a lot like guilt when seen from the outside. That night, the sheriff drove back toward the lake. The rain had thinned to drizzle, the world washed clean and colorless. She parked near the north inlet, the same spot where the fisherman had found the plane. The rescue barge was gone now, leaving only churned mud and tire tracks. She stood at the water's edge, flashlight beams sweeping across the surface. The lake was utterly still. Somewhere beneath that mirror calm lay the wreck, the photographs, and Claire's remains. A faint sound drifted through the fog, a distant engine, maybe a boat. Elaine turned off the light and listened. The noise grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Nothing, just the whisper of wind through the trees. She waited another minute, uneasy, then turned back toward her vehicle. That's when she saw the footprints, fresh, deep in the mud beside her truck. One set, large, leading from the forest to her driver's door and back again. Her pulse spiked. "Reed?" she called out, voice steady. Only the rain answered. She opened the driver's side carefully, scanning the cab. Everything was as she'd left it, except for a single object placed neatly on the passenger seat. A small cassette tape, labeled in faded handwriting. "For Sheriff Mercer." Elaine picked it up, heart hammering. Back in the office, she slid the cassette into the old player. The tape clicked, hissed, then a man's voice spoke, slow, almost intimate. "You think the lake gives up its dead, Sheriff? But the lake doesn't bury people. People bury people." A pause. "If you want the truth, come alone." Midnight. North Dock static swallowed the rest. Elaine leaned back, the room spinning slightly. The voice was distorted but familiar, gravelly, deliberate. Carl burst in a moment later, out of breath. "Got the audio profile back from Austin. That third voice on the tower recording. It's a 75% match to Reed Talbot." Elaine turned the volume down, staring at the cassette still turning in the deck. "I know," she said quietly. "He just invited me to meet him." Outside, the storm gathered again, wind pushing waves against the shore. In the distance, beyond the tree line, a single lantern flickered at the water's edge, a small, waiting light. The lake looked different at night. The glass-gray calm from daylight turned to a sheet of black glass that reflected nothing, swallowing even the moon. Sheriff Elaine Mercer parked 100 yards from the north dock and killed the engine. The headlights died, leaving only the low hiss of wind through reeds. She checked her sidearm, clipped a flashlight to her jacket, and started down the narrow path. The forest pressed close on both sides. Branches scraped against her sleeves. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, then fell silent. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of wet earth and rust. When she reached the dock, a single kerosene lantern burned at its end, just as promised. Its light trembled across the water, a golden halo in the dark. No boat, no sound of an engine, only the slow lap of waves against the pilings. "Reed," she called softly. "I'm here." Her voice went nowhere, absorbed by mist. She stepped forward, boards creaking under her boots. The lantern flickered. The flame leaned with the breeze. Halfway down the dock, she stopped. Something lay near the lantern, a small metal toolbox, the kind mechanics used for spark plugs and wrenches. She crouched and flipped the latch. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some were damp and curling at the edges, others sealed in plastic sleeves. All were of women, different women, each sitting somewhere along Honeymoon Lake, on the dock, in a boat, near the cabins. Each photo taken from a distance. Elaine's stomach turned. At the bottom of the box lay a single Polaroid of Claire Warren, identical to the one from the duffel bag, but marked on the back with 3 words scrawled in black marker. She saw me. The boards behind her groaned. She rose slowly, hand drifting toward her holster. "Put the gun down, Sheriff." The voice came from the shadows at the tree line, gravelly, calm. Reed Talbot stepped into the lantern light. He looked older than he had that morning, like the night itself had drained him. In his hands he held no weapon, only a small dictaphone recorder, its red light blinking. "I knew you'd come," he said. "You're like her." Couldn't let it rest. Elaine kept her stance measured. "You left me a tape. Said you wanted to tell the truth?" He nodded. 16 years is a long time to carry something like this, then start talking. Reed's gaze slid past her to the dark water. Daniel Warren wasn't the man everyone thought he was. That flight school of his. He was running more than tourists. He ferried packages across the border. Cash, sometimes worse. Claire found out. Wanted to go to the police. He couldn't have that Elaine studied his face. "You expect me to believe he murdered his own wife?" Reed shook his head slowly. "No, he tried, but the lake beat him to it." A gust of wind scattered the top layer of photos, sending them fluttering across the dock like pale leaves. Reed didn't move to catch them. "She came to me that week," he said, crying, scared. Said Daniel was planning one last trip. Asked if I'd help her get out. I told her to meet me here after dark. He rubbed his temple, eyes wet. She never showed. Only Daniel did. Elaine's grip tightened on the flashlight. "You saw him that night?" "He was flying low over the lake, lights off. I signaled him with the lantern, same one you're looking at. Plane skimmed the water, then banked hard toward the cove. Next morning, nothing. No plane, no Claire." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Reed laughed once, bitterly. "You think anyone would have believed me? Local mechanic claims missing pilot murdered his wife on their honeymoon? I'd fixed that plane. They would have said I sabotaged it." Elaine took a step closer. "So, you buried the evidence." He met her eyes. "I buried the truth. There's a difference." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small cassette, holding it up between 2 fingers. "Tower recording's incomplete. You heard that. This is the rest. Hand it over." He shook his head. "Not here. I'll give it to you when you understand what's really in that lake." Before she could answer, the darkness beyond them shifted. A branch snapping underfoot. Both turned. Reed's expression changed from weary to frightened. "Someone followed you," he hissed. Elaine swung her light toward the trees. For a split second she caught movement, a figure slipping between trunks, pale jacket flashing, then silence. When she turned back, Reed was already backing away down the dock. "It's not safe tonight," he said. "Tomorrow noon, old boathouse. Bring no one, Reed." But he was gone, swallowed by the fog. The lantern guttered and went out. Elaine drove back to town through sheets of mist that felt almost solid. Her hands shook on the wheel, adrenaline pulsing under her skin. Every shadow along the roadside looked alive. When she finally reached the sheriff's office, she found Deputy Carl waiting outside, rain slicking his jacket. "Where the hell have you been?" "We traced that cassette you got. It wasn't recorded on any equipment Reed owns. It's a studio-grade model. Someone's been staging these messages." Elaine stared at him, soaked and pale. "He's got another tape. Claims it's the missing part of the flight recording Carl's brows knit." "Then why keep luring you out there alone?" She didn't answer. Inside, she placed the toolbox on her desk, the photographs still damp. One image caught her eye, different from the others. It showed the lake at sunset, the water glowing orange. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, stood a man's reflection in the cabin window. Not Reed, not Daniel, someone else. Elaine felt the first shiver of something colder than fear. Recognition. Far out on Honeymoon Lake, the fog drifted apart for a moment, revealing a faint yellow glow from inside Reed Talbot's boathouse. Through the thin wooden walls came the crackle of an old tape playing, Daniel Warren's voice looping again and again. "She doesn't understand what you did. What you did." Then a click. Silence. The next day broke gray and cold. A fine mist hung above Honeymoon Lake, dulling the outlines of the trees and cabins along the shore. Sheriff Elaine Mercer drove back toward Reed Talbot's property, every turn of the gravel road heavy with the echo of last night's voice. Tomorrow noon, old boathouse. Bring no one. She hadn't told Deputy Carl, not because she trusted Reed, but because she didn't trust anyone not to spook him, and she needed answers before the lake swallowed them again. The boathouse stood quiet at the water's edge, its reflection rippling in the gray water. The lantern from the night before still hung on a hook, unlit now, its glass fogged with dew. Elaine unholstered her weapon, checked the chamber, then pushed open the warped door. The smell hit her first, mildew, motor oil, and the faint sweetness of decay. Inside, the boathouse was dim except for the thin blades of light that slipped through the gaps in the planks. A half-dismantled boat sat propped on wooden blocks. Tools lined the walls. "Reed," she called softly. No answer, only the slow drip of water from the eaves. She stepped further in, boots thudding on the planks. The floor creaked under her weight, more than it should have. She shone her flashlight downward. Some of the boards near the back were newer than the rest, lighter in color, screwed down with modern bolts instead of nails. A patch job. A sudden thump from beneath made her freeze. One, then another. Soft, but deliberate. "Reed," she said again, louder. Silence. Then a faint metallic sound, scraping, like a chain dragging against wood. She knelt, fingers brushing the edge of the newer boards. The screws were worn but loose. Someone had been in here often. She used her pocket knife to pry up the first one. The plank shifted easily, revealing darkness below and the scent of stagnant water. She lowered the flashlight beam. Something glinted back. A chain. And at the end of it, a metal trunk submerged in the shallow water beneath the boathouse. Elaine's pulse quickened. She grabbed a nearby wrench and pried up the next few boards until the trunk was exposed. The water around it rippled with oily residue, the surface reflecting her pale face back at her. She crouched, reached in, and heaved. The chain scraped loudly as the trunk rose, heavy and reluctant. When she pulled it onto the planks, the smell of rust and rot filled the air. She unlatched the lid. Inside lay photographs, maps, and what looked like fragments of clothing sealed in plastic bags. The top photo showed a smiling young woman standing beside a Cessna, Claire Warren again. Beneath it, another photo. Not Claire this time, another woman, unfamiliar, and another beneath that. All different faces, dozens of them, each with a date scrawled on the back. Each marked Honeymoon Lake. Elaine's throat tightened. She picked up a smaller object from the corner of the trunk. A cassette labeled N359 2C/final transmission. Daniel's call sign. Her hands trembled as she slid it into her portable player. The tape clicked, hissed, and then the same tense male voice filled the boathouse. "Tower, this is November 3592. Charlie, God, she's not breathing. The voice broke into static. Then another, lower, calm, chilling. "You did what had to be done, Danny. Now keep flying." Elaine's breath caught. That second voice. She knew it. Not Reed's. Older, heavier. A voice used to giving orders. The tape cut abruptly to silence. Footsteps sounded behind her. She spun, weapon raised, and froze. Reed stood in the doorway, hands empty, eyes rimmed red. "I told you not to come alone," he said quietly. "Now you've heard it." Elaine kept her aim steady. "Who's the second voice?" Reed stepped closer, water dripping from his boots. "You already know." "Say it." He hesitated. "Charlie Carnes." Elaine frowned. "The local contractor?" "He left years ago." Reed shook his head. "He never left." "He just changed what he called himself." "He was Daniel's silent partner. Used the charter service to move things for him. Drugs, maybe people. The lake's perfect for it. Deep enough to hide anything. Why keep the evidence?" "Because I was scared of him," Reed said. "And because I thought someday someone like you would come asking. Someone who could stop him." Elaine studied him, weighing every word. "Where is Carnes now?" Reed's mouth tightened. "You saw his light last night." Elaine blinked. "That was him in the woods?" Reed nodded slowly. He never stopped watching the lake. Never stopped coming back. "He's here." A faint noise outside made them both turn. The crunch of gravel, then the groan of a wood. The boathouse door creaked open wider. A figure stood silhouetted against the glare of daylight, broad shoulders, heavy frame. Reed whispered, "Run!" Elaine fired a warning shot into the floor. "Stop right there!" The figure didn't move. Instead, it spoke in a calm, almost amused tone. "You found the trunk." "Good. Saves me the trouble of fishing it out again." Elaine's breath hitched. The voice matched the one on the tape. The second voice. Charlie Carnes stepped into view. Older now, beard streaked with white, eyes cold and bright. His presence filled the space like smoke. "Reed," he said evenly. "You should have burned it like I told you." Reed backed toward Elaine, his face drained of color. "Charlie, it's over. They know." "Over?" Carnes smiled faintly. "Nothing ends here, Reed." You should know that by now. He lifted his right hand. Something small gleamed, a revolver. Elaine aimed for his chest. "Drop it!" Carnes fired first. The shot thundered through the boathouse, echoing off the tin roof. Reed jerked backward, clutching his side, collapsing against the wooden supports. Elaine ducked behind the half-dismantled boat, returning fire. 2 shots splintered the door frame near Carnes's shoulder. He laughed, low and steady. "You think you understand this place?" he called. "You don't. The lake takes what it wants." Then he was gone, vanished into the fog. Elaine crawled to Reed's side. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and steady. "Stay with me," she said, pressing her hand over the wound. Reed's lips moved. He'll go back to where it started. The cabin. North Shore. Elaine's heart pounded. "We'll get him." Reed smiled faintly, eyes dimming. "Tell her. I tried to save her." Then his head fell back against the boards, the breath leaving him in a long, rattling sigh. Elaine knelt there for a moment, surrounded by the whisper of water beneath the planks and the ghostly hum of the tape still spinning. Then she rose, wiped her hands on her jacket, and looked toward the northern shore, where the mist was thickest. She could almost hear the lake breathing. By the time Sheriff Elaine Mercer reached the North Shore, fog blanketed the trees so thickly she could barely see beyond the hood of her cruiser. The air felt colder here, heavier. Each breath condensed before her lips like smoke. She killed the engine and stepped out into silence. No birds, no wind, just the faint creak of pines shifting under the weight of their own age. In the distance, through the mist, she saw the outline of the cabin Reed had mentioned. It leaned against the slope of the hill, half swallowed by ivy. The roof sagged. The porch boards hung loose like broken ribs. Its reflection rippled faintly in the lake below, where the water lapped soundlessly at the shore. Elaine drew her weapon and flashlight, advancing slowly. Her boots squelched in the wet soil, each step deliberate. The forest seemed to lean closer around her. When she reached the porch, she noticed something strange. Footprints, fresh, tracking mud up the steps. The prints were wide and deep. Someone heavy. Someone recently here. She pressed her shoulder against the door. It opened without resistance, groaning on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of mold and something older. Iron, rot, time. Dust floated through her flashlight beam like ash. A table sat in the middle of the single room, covered in maps of the lake. Topographic, aerial, even hand-drawn sketches. Each map was marked with circles, X's, and numbers written in red ink. On one, an arrow pointed to the north inlet with the words, "Deep Pocket, 182 feet." Elaine's eyes moved across the papers until she found one labeled October 2003. The route drawn on it matched Daniel Warren's flight plan. Something rustled behind her. She spun, flashlight slicing across the shadows. A shape darted past the doorway. Tall, fast, vanishing toward the tree line. Elaine bolted after it, boots hammering against the wet ground. "Stop!" she shouted. Her beam caught flashes of movement. A gray jacket, a shoulder, the glint of metal. The figure stumbled down toward the lakeshore, then turned suddenly, raising something in its hand. The gun fired once. Bark exploded beside her face. Elaine dove behind a fallen log, mud splattering her uniform. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Carnes!" she yelled. "Put it down!" No response, only the soft shuffle of footsteps circling. She moved silently, crouched low, until she reached the next tree. Her flashlight caught a reflection. The lake. For a heartbeat, she saw him clearly across the water. Charlie Carnes, standing knee-deep at the edge, revolver dangling from his hand, eyes fixed on the lake's surface. "Don't," she said. He turned slowly, and even through the fog, she could see his smile. "You came alone," he said, "just like the girl." Elaine's throat tightened. "You killed her." Carnes shook his head. "No, the lake did. Always the lake." He raised the revolver, not at her, but toward the water. "You know why it's called Honeymoon Lake, Sheriff? They say a couple drowned here on their wedding night. Never found the bodies. Every 7 years it takes another." He laughed softly. "Superstition, right? But it listens. Put the gun down," Elaine ordered. Instead, he stepped further into the water until it reached his thighs. The ripples spread outward in perfect circles. "She screamed for him," Carnes said quietly. "But he was already gone. Sank like a stone. Daniel Warren? He thought he could betray me. Thought he could leave with my cargo. But Claire, she saw everything." I couldn't let her talk. Elaine's grip tightened. "So you killed her?" He shook his head again, expression unreadable. "I let her drown." "Same thing." Suddenly he laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "But she didn't go quietly. No one ever does. She scratched me, fought me. When the plane went under, I heard her whisper something. You know what she said?" Elaine didn't answer. "She said, 'He'll come back for me.'" Carnes' eyes gleamed in the flashlight's beam. "I waited 16 years for that promise to break. Guess who finally came back?" Elaine's stomach turned. "Daniel." Carnes smiled wider. "He crawled out of that lake 5 days ago. Didn't die after all." For a second, the world seemed to tilt. "That's impossible," Elaine said. "We found Claire's remains. He came back," Carnes interrupted. "Walked out of the water like a ghost. I saw him. Same eyes, same voice. But not the same man." He tapped his temple. "The lake keeps them, changes them. You'll see." The revolver trembled in his hand. "He's waiting down there right now." Elaine took a careful step closer. "Charlie, listen to me. You're in shock. Reed's dead. It's over. Come back to shore." Carnes looked past her toward the cabin. "Reed?" he said softly. Then his face twisted. "That coward. I told him to burn it all." He raised the gun toward her suddenly. Elaine fired first. The shot struck his shoulder, spinning him backward into the lake. He vanished beneath the surface with barely a splash. Elaine held her aim steady, waiting. 10 seconds, 20. But he didn't resurface. Only bubbles rose through the mist. Then silence. She exhaled, lowering her weapon. The water smoothed over, calm again. When she turned to leave, something caught her eye near the shoreline. A wooden dock, half collapsed, almost hidden by cattails. At its edge lay an old rope, coiled and frayed, tied to something beneath the surface. Elaine crouched, tugged at it. The rope was slick with algae but solid. It led downward into darkness. She pulled harder. A metal crate broke the surface, dripping mud and weeds. She dragged it onto the sand and pried the latches open. Inside were two things, a human skull and a sealed envelope. The skull was clean, pale, its jaw broken. The envelope was stamped with a flight insignia, N3592C. Inside, a photograph. Daniel Warren, alive, standing on this very dock. Taken days ago. Elaine stared at it, disbelief washing over her. The eyes in the picture were hollow, the skin waxen, but it was him, or something that looked like him. Behind her, the water rippled. Slowly, purposefully. Elaine raised her flashlight. The beam cut across the lake just in time to catch the faint shape of a head rising from the water. Slick hair, pale skin, motionless eyes staring right at her. Then it sank again, leaving only rings spreading outward in the dark. Elaine staggered back from the shore, her heart racing. The photograph trembled in her hand. If that really was Daniel Warren, then Honeymoon Lake hadn't finished with any of them. Morning came without sunlight. A thick overcast dulled the forest to shades of pewter and bone. Sheriff Elaine Mercer sat in her cruiser outside the Mason County Sheriff's Office, the photograph of Daniel Warren on the passenger seat beside her. The face stared back through water-warped eyes, alive but wrong, as if something inside him had been carved out and filled with silence. She finally stepped inside. The smell of coffee and damp paper greeted her. Deputy Carl Timmons looked up from his desk. "You look like hell," he said quietly. "Where's Reed?" Elaine set the photograph down. Dead. Carnes shot him. Carl's jaw tightened. "Carnes?" "He's gone. Maybe dead too." She hesitated. "But there's more. I found this at the North Shore." Carl studied the photo, frowning. "Who took it?" "That's what we're going to find out." She handed him the sealed envelope marked N3592C. Inside were 3 pages. Flight logs written in Daniel's neat hand, dated only a week earlier. The most recent entry read, 7 October 2019. Honeymoon Lake. Engines sound, still waiting. She comes to me in the fog. Carl looked up. 2019. That's 16 years after he vanished. Elaine nodded. And the ink's fresh. They drove to the county forensics lab in town. The technician, a thin woman named Dr. Min Park, placed the photograph under magnification. "The emulsion's modern," she said. "Cheap instant film stock, sold mostly in novelty cameras the past few years. And there's moisture damage consistent with fresh lake water. So whoever took this was here recently," Elaine said. Dr. Park adjusted the focus. "Look closer. Behind him. See that reflection?" Elaine leaned in. In the water beside Daniel's image, a second silhouette shimmered. Broad-shouldered, head turned slightly toward the camera. Charlie Carnes. Elaine felt her pulse spike. He didn't drown. That evening she returned to the lake with Carl. The fog was thinner now, streaked with dying light. They followed the narrow service road that wound toward the cabins on the East Ridge. The last one, Cabin 12, belonged to the old charter company once registered under Daniel Warren's name. The porch steps were slick, the door padlocked but old. Elaine pried it open. Inside smelled of mildew and kerosene. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, its chain swaying slightly as though disturbed. A radio transmitter sat on the counter, humming. Its power light glowed faint orange. Carl frowned. No grid power out here. Generator? Elaine checked the cable. It ran through the floorboards and out toward the lake. Someone's been using this. She turned a knob. Static filled the room. Then a voice, faint, crackling. November 359, to Charlie, requesting vector. Carl froze. That's the same transmission. Fuel low. She's cold. God help me. The line cut. A new voice came through, slow and distorted, repeating the same words over and over. He walks in the water. He walks in the water. Elaine shut it off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the static. Outside, dusk had deepened into full night. The two walked toward the dock behind the cabin. The water lay flat as slate. A faint ripple spread across its surface, though no wind stirred. Carl crouched to examine the boards. Footprints, he murmured. Bare ones. They were fresh, wide, clear, each heel pressed deep into the damp wood, leading from the lake toward the cabin. Then back again. Elaine's throat tightened. Get your camera. He reached for it and stopped. Wait. Do you hear that? From somewhere under the dock came a slow, rhythmic knocking, like something striking wood from below. 3 times. Pause. 3 times again. Carl's face went pale. Fish? Too regular. Elaine crouched, shining her light between the slats. For a moment she saw only darkness, the glint of water. Then, faintly, a hand broke the surface, pale, still, fingers splayed. It hovered there for a heartbeat before slipping soundlessly back beneath. Carl stumbled backward. Jesus Christ! Stay calm! Elaine snapped, though her own voice trembled. She aimed the beam again. The water was calm, empty. No bubbles, no ripple. She swallowed hard. Call search and rescue. We need divers here by dawn. Carl nodded and hurried toward the cruiser. Elaine stayed by the dock, staring at the black surface. Somewhere out there, a loon cried, a long hollow note that faded into the trees. Hours later, at headquarters, she spread the photos and flight logs across the table. Sleep was impossible. Every pattern she traced led back to the same coordinates. The deepest trench of Honeymoon Lake, marked on Daniel's old map as 182 feet. She found herself whispering the numbers aloud like a mantra. 18-2, 18-2. The clock on the wall clicked past 3 a.m. Rain began again, soft and steady. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Sheriff Mercer. Silence, then breathing. She nearly hung up when a voice, hoarse, deliberate, spoke. You found my photo. Her pulse stuttered. Who is this? You came looking for me. Now come the rest of the way, Daniel Warren. She's still down here, Elaine. She's waiting. The line went dead. Elaine stared at the phone, the rain hammering harder against the windows. She replayed the words in her mind. Still down here. She grabbed her jacket and keys. If Daniel Warren really was alive, the lake itself was holding him. And whatever he'd become, it was calling her there. As she drove back through the storm, lightning flickered across the tree line, revealing the outline of the lake in blinding white. For an instant, she saw it. The faint figure of a man standing waist-deep in the water, facing her headlights. Then darkness again. Elaine didn't stop. She kept driving until the road disappeared into fog, the radio crackling with a single repeating transmission. November 3592, Charlie. Still waiting. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the air sharp and raw. Mist coiled low over the lake as the county dive unit assembled their gear on the north dock. The hum of compressors, the clink of tanks, the soft murmurs of men trying not to look toward the water too long. It all blended into a tense rhythm. Sheriff Elaine Mercer stood at the edge of the dock, wind tugging at her raincoat, eyes fixed on the water. It looked bottomless today, black and opaque, like a sheet of glass laid over an abyss. Deputy Carl Timmons adjusted his headset beside her. Depth scan confirms what the old map said. Trench goes down to 182 feet, drops off sudden, like a sinkhole. Elaine nodded. That's where we start. The lead diver, Sergeant Matthew Cortez, approached. Visibility's under 3 feet. Currents are strong below the thermocline. If anything's down there, it'll be tough to bring up. Do what you can, Elaine said. We just need proof. He gave a curt nod and signaled his team. 2 divers slipped into the water, their flashlights carving narrow cones of light that disappeared within arm's reach. The lake closed around them silently. Elaine waited, watching the faint bubbles rise and pop on the surface. Each minute stretched thin. At 10 minutes, radio crackle. Reaching shelf. Visibility 0. Wait, structure ahead. Elaine leaned toward the receiver. Describe it. Metallic debris. Looks like wreckage. Cessna frame. Tail number matches. N3592C. Her pulse quickened. There's something else. Opening fuselage now. A long pause. Then a voice, strained. 2 remains visible. 1, no, multiple. Jesus, Elaine's stomach clenched. Repeat that? Multiple skeletal remains, not just one body. She exchanged a glance with Carl. How many? At least 4, maybe 5. Hard to tell. They're entangled. Rope marks on the limbs, some still wearing life vests. Carl swore softly. So Reed was right. He used the lake to hide them. Elaine gripped the radio. Bring them up, careful as you can. The line hissed, then cut to silence. An hour later, the first body bags broke the surface, glistening like oil slicks. The forensic team laid them out on the dock in a grim row. The smell of silt and decay filled the air. Dr. Emily Rhodes arrived, face pale behind her mask. Preliminary count is 5, all female. Judging from bone structure and clothing, different ages, different years. He's been doing this for decades. Elaine knelt beside one of the bags. Inside lay a skull still wrapped in a fragment of blue fabric, something like a dress. She swallowed hard. Claire Warren? Emily shook her head. No, age is wrong. Maybe one of the earlier ones. She handed Elaine a small plastic bag. Inside was a wedding ring, engraved on the inside band. 2M. Forever. R. Elaine frowned. R. Emily nodded. Could be Reed Talbot's wife. You remember? She vanished in '89. Report said she left town. Elaine stared out at the water. Nobody leaves this place, she murmured. By afternoon, the lake had turned silver under a thin veil of sun. The divers surfaced again, exhausted and silent. Sergeant Cortez climbed onto the dock, pulling off his mask. His eyes looked hollow. There's more down there, he said. Something we couldn't reach. Under the wreck, what is it? Elaine asked. He shook his head slowly. Could be another fuselage. Or a storage cage. Too heavy to move. But it's sealed. Sealed how? Welded shut. Elaine felt a chill crawl up her spine. Mark the coordinates. We'll need a crane. Cortez hesitated. Sheriff, there's one more thing. He handed her a small waterproof container. Inside was a tape recorder, corroded but intact, its label smudged. Only 2 letters remained legible. D.W. Elaine turned it over in her hands. Where'd you find this? In the cockpit, strapped to the pilot's seat. She glanced toward the far side of the lake, where the fog still clung stubbornly to the tree line. Get it to forensics. I want it cleaned and digitized today. That evening, Elaine sat in the lab's sound booth with Dr. Park, headphones pressed to her ears. The tape hissed, crackled. Then a man's voice emerged, shaky, breathless. This is Daniel Warren. If anyone finds this, We didn't crash. We were forced down. He made me—" The words broke into static, then returned faintly. "She's gone. I tried to pull her out, but he's still out there. The lake's not—" The recording warped. The last word stretched into a shriek of feedback. Then silence. Elaine pulled the headphones off, pulse hammering. "Can you clean it further?" Dr. Park adjusted the levels, replayed the last seconds. Beneath the static, faintly, another voice whispered something indecipherable. She looped it again, filtering the noise. Slowly, the words became clearer. "He walks in the water." Elaine sat very still. Same phrase from the transmitter. Dr. Park nodded, eyes wide. "It's on a separate channel." Means the second voice wasn't recorded at the same time. It was overlaid later. Someone tampered with this tape. Elaine's mind raced. Charlie Carnes? Could be. But the frequency pattern's strange. It's like it wasn't picked up by a microphone. More like vibration through the metal itself. Elaine exhaled slowly. Through the plane. She left the lab in silence, night already settling outside. The water beyond the window glimmered faintly under a half-moon. At the shoreline, she stopped to look out over the lake. It seemed almost calm again, innocent. But beneath that still surface now lay 5 bodies, a plane, and a sealed cage no one yet had opened. She thought of the voice on the tape. Daniel's voice, pleading, breaking. If he had survived, he was either a man consumed by guilt or something else entirely. A ripple spread across the surface, faint and slow, moving outward from the deepest center. Elaine whispered into the night, "What did you bury down there?" The lake gave no answer, only the soft lap of waves against the dock, steady as breathing. The barge's crane groaned like an animal as its cables strained against the lake's black water. A chill wind cut across the surface, rattling the metal decking underfoot. Sheriff Elaine Mercer stood with her hands buried in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the ripples spreading out from the crane's hook. Below, divers worked blind, their floodlights reduced to vague flickers beneath the surface. The radio hissed with their breathing. Target secured, lifting now. The steel cable tightened. A slick of bubbles and silt boiled to the surface. Slowly, impossibly, a rectangular metal cage emerged from the water, dripping sludge, its sides coated in green algae. The smell that came with it was thick and mineral, a breath from the past. "Bring it up slow," Elaine said. The cage settled onto the barge deck with a heavy clang. The divers stepped back, dripping and pale. It was about 6 feet long, 3 wide, welded shut along every seam. Rust streaked the corners like dried blood. Deputy Carl Timmons leaned in, flashlight sweeping across the metal. "Looks like some kind of holding crate. No markings, no lock." Elaine crouched, tracing the seam with a gloved finger. Industrial welds. Whoever sealed it didn't want it opened again. Dr. Emily Rhodes approached, mask hanging from her neck. "We'll cut it open here." Safer than hauling it to the lab. The cutting torch hissed to life, showering sparks as it bit into the corroded metal. Steam rose, mingling with the fog. Elaine watched every inch give way, a tightness building in her chest. When the final seal broke, the cage exhaled, a long sigh of trapped air, foul and cold. Inside lay a wooden box, water-swollen and cracked. Emily pried it open carefully. The interior was lined with plastic sheeting, and beneath it, bones, hundreds of them. Too many for one person. "Oh God," Carl muttered. Emily's voice stayed clinical. "These aren't all human. Deer, dogs, small mammals." Mixed in deliberately. "Why?" Elaine asked quietly. "Confuse identification." But there was more. Nestled at the center of the bones sat a sealed glass jar. Inside floated a small object, metallic, tarnished, unmistakable. A wedding band. Elaine lifted it gently. The inscription inside was barely legible, the letters worn by time. To C-DW. Her stomach dropped. Claire's ring. Emily's brow furrowed. If that's hers, then why wasn't it on the body we found in the plane? Elaine didn't answer. The possibilities twisted in her mind like dark vines. Carl cleared his throat, pointing. Sheriff, there's something else. At the base of the wooden box, beneath the bones, lay a waterproof case, smaller than a shoebox, its hinges still gleaming faintly. Elaine knelt and unlatched it. Inside, a stack of VHS tapes, each labeled in Daniel Warren's handwriting. Honeymoon Lake, flight tests, Subject 2, night trial. Elaine's breath hitched. Subject 2. Emily glanced at her uneasily. He was experimenting? Carl crossed himself, or documenting. That evening in the sheriff's evidence room, the lights were dim and the air cold. Elaine threaded the first tape into an old player hooked to a monitor. The image crackled to life. Grainy black and white footage of the seaplane hangar, circa 2003. Daniel Warren stood in frame, younger, cleaner cut, speaking to the camera. Trial 2. Honeymoon Lake. Atmospheric interference is consistent. We'll attempt a low-altitude pass at 0200. She doesn't know yet. He turned, revealing Charlie Carnes behind him, arms crossed. If this works, we'll have proof, Daniel said. The magnetic readings below the North Shelf, they're not natural. Carnes nodded. And if it doesn't work? Then we bury it. The video cut to static. Elaine ejected it, her pulse hammering. Magnetic readings. Carl frowned. What the hell were they looking for? Geological surveys. She loaded the second tape. This one was filmed from inside the plane. The camera shook as Daniel adjusted the controls, Claire's voice faint in the background, laughing nervously. You sure this is safe? Perfectly safe, Daniel said. I just want to see how deep the signal goes. The view outside the cockpit window showed only fog and black water. Then, a jolt. The camera tilted. Claire screamed. The image blurred, streaks of light flaring across the lens. Then, a sudden burst of white. Blinding, electric, like lightning beneath the surface. The tape ended there. Elaine sat frozen, the hum of the machine loud in the silence. It wasn't an accident, she said softly. They were testing something. Carl rubbed the back of his neck. What kind of something? Doesn't matter. Whatever it was, it cost her life. Later that night, Elaine drove back to the lake alone. The moon hovered low, half hidden behind clouds. The barge lights glowed faintly offshore where the divers had anchored for the night. She stood at the shoreline, staring out toward the trench. The water was calm, too calm, as though the surface itself were holding its breath. In her hand, she turned Claire's ring over and over. The metal was ice cold. Her radio crackled suddenly. Sheriff Mercer, this is base. Do you copy? She lifted the mic. Go ahead. You need to get back here. We've got movement on the lake cameras. What kind of movement? Human silhouette. Walking straight across the surface toward your position, Elaine's breath caught. She turned slowly. At first, she saw only ripples. Then, under the pale moonlight, a shape began to rise from the center of the lake, tall, glistening, steady. Water streamed off the figure's shoulders, its face pale as bone, eyes reflecting the light like glass. Daniel Warren. He stopped waist-deep, staring at her, water dripping from his hair. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. I told her the lake remembers. Elaine's hand tightened on the radio, on the ring, on everything that tethered her to reason. Daniel, she said quietly, what did you do? He smiled faintly. I finished what it started. Then, before she could answer, he turned and sank beneath the water without a ripple. Elaine fell to her knees at the shore, the ring clutched tight in her fist. Somewhere out on the lake, the barge lights flickered once, then went out, plunging the water into darkness. By dawn, mist lay heavy over the town again, dulling sound and color alike. The sheriff's office felt colder than usual. The old radiators hissed without warmth. Sheriff Elaine Mercer hadn't gone home. She sat at her desk in the flicker of the single fluorescent tube that still worked, Claire's wedding ring resting beside a cup of untouched coffee. The VHS tapes, cleaned, dried, catalogued, waited in a box near her elbow. She'd watched the first 2 until her eyes burned, unable to sleep. There were 4 left. She slid the 3rd one into the player. The screen bloomed to life with gray static, then steadied. A small room, concrete walls, dim bulb swinging overhead. The air seemed stale even through the screen. Daniel Warren sat in the center, hair unkempt, face thinner. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice hoarse. "Day 6, he said. "Tests continue. Readings increase near the trench. Reed says it's the minerals, but it's more than that. When we run the sonar, it echoes back wrong, like the lake is answering." He rubbed his temples. "Claire says she hears it too now, at night. Whispers under the hull." He lifted a small recorder and set it beside him. "If anything happens to us, play this." Elaine leaned closer. The camera shook slightly as Daniel turned it off. End of tape. She pressed stop, then rewind, and switched to the 4th. This one opened mid-flight. The image was blurred by fog and static. The plane's altimeter needle trembled. Claire's voice, frightened but steady. "Danny, you're too low." "I can't lose the signal," he answered. "It's right below us." Suddenly a flash, white, searing, filling the frame. Then darkness. The tape whined, slowed, stopped. Elaine sat back, skin prickling. Each recording was worse than the last, more disjointed, as if the camera itself had begun to break down under whatever they were chasing. She reached for the next cassette, its label barely legible. Echo chamber. When the screen came alive this time, she felt a twist of unease in her stomach. The camera faced a wall of mirrors, floor to ceiling, inside some kind of unfinished room. Reflections multiplied endlessly, stretching Daniel's figure into an infinite corridor. He stood barefoot on wet concrete, staring into the lens. His eyes looked hollow. "I found it," he whispered. "The resonance point?" He held up a small metal sphere, glinting under the harsh light. "Carnes said it was natural, but it's not. It hums when you bring it out of the water." He placed the sphere on the floor. The camera microphone picked up a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. It mimics sound, plays back whatever it hears. But when I listened close, it wasn't my voice anymore. He crouched, whispering to it. For a long moment, only the faint hum filled the room. Then, from the speaker, a second voice whispered back. His words reversed, distorted, lower. Daniel flinched, breathing fast. "Claire says it isn't an echo. She says it's the lake." He reached toward the camera. The frame jolted sideways, then cut to black. Elaine sat frozen. Carl appeared in the doorway, holding 2 coffees. "You've been here all night," he said softly. "You should—" He stopped when he saw her face. "What is it?" She gestured toward the screen. "They found something under that water. Something that makes sound where there shouldn't be any." Carl frowned. "Like sonar feedback, or something else. They called it the resonance point." She showed him Claire's ring. "And this was down there too." She wanted to leave. He didn't. Carl sipped his coffee. "So you think Daniel killed her because of whatever they found?" "I don't know. Maybe the lake killed them both." She rewound the last few seconds, turned up the volume. The hum deepened, a pulsing rhythm that made the air in the room vibrate. Then faintly, almost beneath hearing, another voice joined in. Carl stiffened. "Did that come from the tape?" Elaine's eyes narrowed. "It's saying something." She boosted the gain. Through static, the words formed, 18-2. Carl went pale. "The depth." The hum rose suddenly, a feedback squeal that made both of them flinch. Elaine hit stop. The noise died. For a moment, the only sound was the rain outside. Carl cleared his throat. Maybe it's just interference. Elaine rubbed her temple. Or maybe that's what drove him over the edge. That afternoon, Dr. Park arrived from the lab with a report. "You need to see this," she said, spreading photographs across Elaine's desk. "Mineral analysis from the trench shows high traces of magnetite and manganese, enough to distort any radio signal. But that's not the strange part." She pointed to a scanning electron image of a black fragment taken from the cage. "This metal isn't local. It's refined alloy, military grade." Mid-1990s manufacture, Elaine frowned. Meaning Daniel Warren wasn't testing a natural phenomenon. He was flying over a restricted dump site. Possibly government experiments, magnetic resonance tests. The echoes they heard could have been real interference. "Then why the bones?" Carl asked. Dr. Park hesitated. "Maybe someone used the cover story to hide bodies long before the plane. If Carnes was involved, the operation could have been trafficking, human cargo, not data." Elaine sat back. The lake wasn't cursed. It was contaminated. With secrets, with history, with guilt. That night she returned once more to the footage, unable to stop herself. She played the final seconds of echo chamber again. Daniel's reflection looked straight into the lens, eyes black, lips moving soundlessly. She slowed the playback to half speed. Beneath the hum, his voice emerged faintly. "If you hear this, it means the lake heard you first." The monitor flickered, image distorting into static that seemed to ripple outward, almost like waves. Elaine reached for the power switch, and the static whispered her name. "Elaine!" She froze. The screen went dark. Behind her, somewhere deep in the building's pipes, a low vibration began to pulse. Steady, slow, like a heartbeat rising from below. She turned toward the window. Outside, in the moonlight, Honeymoon Lake shimmered faintly. For the first time, it looked alive. By morning, the entire town felt off-kilter. Dogs barked through the night for no reason, car alarms went off near the docks, and people swore they'd felt the ground hum beneath their feet. Sheriff Elaine Mercer hadn't slept. She sat in her truck overlooking the lake, sunlight just breaking through the mist. The reflection on the water was too bright, like light bending through glass. She rubbed her temples and replayed the words from the tape in her head. "If you hear this, it means the lake heard you first." Her radio crackled. "Sheriff?" "You might want to get down to the dive bar. Hank Keller's losing it again." Elaine sighed. "I'm on my way." The dockside tavern sat low and crooked near the boat launch, its windows still fogged from the night before. Inside, Hank Keller, one of the fishermen who'd first reported lights on the water, was pacing between tables, wild-eyed, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. "You hear it?" he asked before she could speak. "It's in the pipes now. My trailer's shaking. You think I'm drunk, but I ain't." Elaine kept her voice calm. "Slow down, Hank. What exactly did you hear?" He stared past her, voice dropping to a rasp. Like voices, like someone talking from under the floor, kept saying, 18-2. Elaine felt her chest tighten. "You sure of that number?" He nodded hard, over and over, like a chant. Outside, a sudden rumble made the window panes rattle. Everyone froze. Elaine rushed out the door. The lake beyond the trees was calm, but the old boathouse roof sagged slightly, boards trembling. She jogged closer and saw the waterline had risen nearly a foot overnight. Dr. Emily Rhodes arrived minutes later, still in her lab coat. "You seeing this too?" Elaine nodded. "The level's climbing." "You run any tests this morning?" Emily hesitated. "Actually, yes. The magnetometer's been spiking every hour, like the field's pulsing. But that shouldn't affect water levels. Unless something's moving down there," Elaine said quietly. They both turned toward the lake. Back at the station, Dr. Park was already analyzing the echo chamber recording. The hum frequency's increasing, she explained. What was a 32 hertz vibration yesterday is now 41. That's not mechanical, it's organic. Rhythmic. Carl frowned. Like a heartbeat. Park hesitated, closer to breathing. Elaine stared at the waveform on the monitor, peaks and valleys pulsing like lungs. What if the resonance isn't just sound, she asked. What if it's transmitting through the water into everything connected to it? Like sonar, Carl said. Like infection. Park met her eyes. Sheriff, are you suggesting the lake is alive? Elaine didn't answer. By late afternoon, the barge crew reported another anomaly. Bubbles rising from the trench in perfect rhythm, 1 every 6 seconds. The sonar buoy stationed above it was picking up movement. Large, slow, circular. Elaine and Carl boarded the patrol boat and crossed to the site. The lake was unnaturally still. No wind, no ripples, except where the bubbles rose. Carl checked the readings. Sonar shows displacement the size of a van, but there's nothing solid on the scan. Elaine squinted at the surface. It's under us. A hollow thud vibrated through the hull. Carl jumped. You felt that? Before Elaine could respond, something broke the surface near the bow. A burst of air, then a shape. A metal sphere, half the size of a basketball, rolled lazily against the boat before sinking again. Elaine reached instinctively, catching it with a net before it disappeared. The surface of the sphere shimmered faintly, tiny grooves carved into its skin, patterns like sound waves frozen in steel. Carl leaned closer. That's the thing from the tape. Elaine nodded, voice low. The resonance point. The instant she said it, the sphere pulsed once in her hand, warm, vibrating like a living thing. Carl recoiled. Jesus, Sheriff, drop it! But she didn't. Instead, she stared at the rippling reflection of her face across its mirrored surface. For a brief second, she saw someone else looking back. Daniel Warren. Then the vibration stopped. Back on shore, Elaine locked the sphere inside an evidence container. She called Park immediately. Seal this thing in lead if you have to, she said. It reacts to sound, maybe even thought. Don't test it alone, Park frowned. We need to analyze. Not yet. I want containment first. As Elaine hung up, thunder rolled low across the hills. Except the sky was clear. That night she drove to the Warren property, the old boathouse Daniel had used for his experiments. It had been abandoned for years, but the padlock was broken, the door ajar. Inside, dust hung thick in the air. The floorboards creaked under her boots. On the workbench lay pages of Daniel's notebooks, warped with age. The handwriting was frantic, looping, sometimes smeared by water stains. She flipped one open. Claire says it follows her dreams, says it whispers my name when I'm asleep. Magnetic resonance triggers auditory hallucinations. Or maybe the other way around, the lake doesn't want to be silent. It needs witnesses. Elaine exhaled shakily. She turned another page and froze. A sketch of the sphere, drawn cross-sectioned, showing a hollow core filled with coiled wiring and something labeled simply vocal chamber. She heard the faintest sound behind her. A creak. Carl? She called softly. No answer. She turned, flashlight sweeping across the walls. The shadows seemed to shift, bending toward her. Then she heard it, faint but distinct. A whisper. Elaine. Her breath hitched. The sound wasn't coming from behind her. It came from the lake, through the cracked window panes, vibrating the glass like a tuning fork. She stepped closer, listening. Beneath her name, other words murmured. A chorus, rising and falling with the waves. 18-2, beneath, come down. Elaine backed away slowly, heart hammering. She reached the door, slammed it shut behind her, and ran to her truck. From the hill, she looked back. The boathouse lights flickered on, though she hadn't touched a switch. and for one impossible moment, she thought she saw Claire Warren standing in the window, her hair floating around her face as if underwater. Then the light went out. Back at the station, Elaine collapsed into her chair. The hum was still faint in her ears, like a memory she couldn't shake. She pressed her palms over them, but it didn't help. The sound was inside now. The radio clicked suddenly. "Sheriff Mercer, this is Dr. Park. You need to come back. The containment box, it's glowing." Elaine's eyes snapped open. "What?" "And it's humming in sync with the sonar buoy." Elaine grabbed her keys. "Seal the lab and keep everyone out." "I'm on my way outside." The wind had picked up. The mist over Honeymoon Lake glowed faintly with pulses of blue light, steady, rhythmic, almost like breath. The lake was awake. By the time Sheriff Elaine Mercer reached the county lab, the sky above the lake had turned the color of lead. The building's windows pulsed with a faint blue light that throbbed in rhythm with the storm clouds. Her headlights flickered as she pulled into the lot, radio hissing with bursts of static that almost formed words. Inside, alarms wailed softly. Dr. Park met her in the hallway, pale, shaking. "It started 20 minutes ago," she said. The sphere heated up, then the instruments began copying the pulse pattern. Even the power grid syncing to it. Elaine followed her into the containment room. The metal case that held the sphere glowed through its seams, each breath of light accompanied by a low, resonant hum that vibrated in their bones. On the monitors, the lake's sonar feed pulsed at the same tempo. Carl was already there, headset crooked around his neck. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the waveform on the screen. "It's not random. It's language. Repeating structure, same 4-second spacing. What's it saying?" He swallowed. "Come down." The lights overhead dimmed once, twice. Then the glass of the containment box cracked with a sound like ice splitting. A wave of cold air swept through the room, carrying the scent of wet earth and rust. "Kill the power," Elaine ordered. Park slammed the breaker. The hum stopped, then returned, deeper, no longer mechanical. The sphere split cleanly in two. Inside, a hollow core shimmered with black water. It rolled out onto the floor and began to leak, the liquid spreading across the tiles in a thin sheet. Where it touched, the reflection wasn't of the ceiling, but of Honeymoon Lake, moonlit and endless. Elaine stared, transfixed. The water in the reflection rippled once, and a face appeared there. Claire Warren, eyes open, lips moving soundlessly. Park backed away. "Sheriff, we need to evacuate." The lights blew out. Everything went black except the reflection on the floor, which glowed faintly from within. From somewhere inside that mirror surface, a voice spoke, calm, layered, both male and female. "You heard us. Now you belong to the echo." Elaine felt the pull before she saw it, the gravity of sound itself tugging her forward. She dropped to her knees, palms against the cold water. The hum resonated through her ribs, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat until she couldn't tell which was which. Carl shouted her name, distant. Park pulled at her shoulder, but Elaine's reflection moved on its own now, hand stretching out from beneath the surface to meet hers. When their fingers touched, she felt the cold of the lake rush up her arm, flooding her lungs with pressure and silence. She was underwater. For a moment, she thought she'd died. The world was blue and weightless. Light rippled from above, fading into infinite black below. Shapes drifted around her, remnants of the wreck, twisted metal, bits of rope. And among them, faces, pale, open-eyed, serene. The lost women of Honeymoon Lake. One of them floated closer. Claire. Her voice was a whisper in the water. He thought he could contain it. But the lake isn't a thing. It's a memory. It keeps what it's shown. Elaine tried to speak, bubbles rising from her mouth. "Daniel!" Claire pointed downward. Below them, the trench yawned wide, lit from within by faint white light. A figure stood on the lake bed. Daniel Warren, or what remained of him. His eyes glowed faintly, his body swaying with the current, tethered by cables of light that pulsed in time with the hum. "He listens for me," Claire said. "We all do. You will too." Elaine shook her head violently. "No." She kicked upward, fighting the pull, lungs screaming. The hum intensified, wrapping around her like a living thing. She felt it clawing at her thoughts, offering calm release. Just listen. A sudden jolt, hands grabbing her shoulders. Then air, blinding light, the sound of her own gasping breath. Carl was dragging her across the floor of the lab, shouting, "Elaine, come on, stay with me!" The reflection on the tiles was gone. The sphere lay in pieces, black and inert. Elaine coughed, shivering, water streaming from her sleeves. "How long was I?" "Seconds," Carl said. "You just dropped." Park knelt beside them, staring at the puddle. "It's evaporating." Within minutes, the last of the water vanished, leaving only a faint salt ring and the echo of that hum vibrating somewhere deep in the walls. That evening, they sealed the fragments of the sphere inside multiple lead containers and sent them to a federal facility 2 states away. The official report cited chemical contamination and gas hallucinations. The lake was declared restricted, patrolled, fenced off, but the locals still heard things. 3 weeks later, Elaine stood alone at the overlook, autumn wind stirring the reeds. The surface of Honeymoon Lake looked perfectly calm now, a flawless mirror. Yet when she leaned close, she could faintly hear it again. The pulse, softer than breath, steady as time. She dropped Claire's ring into the water. It sank without a ripple. Carl's voice crackled over her radio. "You all right down there, Sheriff?" Elaine looked at her reflection. At first her own face, then another layered behind it, watching. She switched off the radio. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "Just listening." Months later, a group of hikers filming drone footage over the frozen lake captured something strange. Beneath the ice, a faint light pulsed rhythmically. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again. The sound engineers who enhanced the audio described it as low-frequency resonance, similar to sonar. Others swore it was a heartbeat. And sometimes, if you listen closely to the wind that moves across Honeymoon Lake at night, you can still hear the faintest whisper. 18-2. Come down. We remember.